Game of Death 2 is a brilliant film. Absolutely stupendous nonsense and thoroughly entertaining from start to finish. I initially thought this was such an open and shut case of cinematic brilliance that there wasn't much more to elaborate on. It was great and that was it. But like its predecessor, the more you read and obsess over the behind the scenes of its production, the more you obsess over this massive cinematic curiosity. I mean, the only reason this film was made in the first place was because the first Game of Death was so successful in Japan despite how terrible it was. A sequel was commissioned and immediately put into production the following year in 1979, despite the star of the film having been deceased for over 5 years at that point. Game of Death 2, at that point simply called Tower of Death, functioned as more of a spiritual sequel to the first Game of Death, as it didn't feature any of the first film's characters. In fact, it plays as more of a sequel to Enter the Dragon, if anything, as the Bruce Lee character in both films share the same name. Only the English dub names Bruce Lee's character Billy Lowe, the name of the character he played in the first Game of Death. To cash in on the Japanese success, most of Game of Death 2 is set and shot there, and follows Lee's characters investigating the supposed death of his friend and martial arts master Chin Koo, played by martial arts film legend Hwang Jang-lee. You immediately feel a step up in energy from the first film within 5 minutes, as Hwang puts his skills on display to this helpless karate master, in this show of epic strength to stock footage of Bruce Lee. Yes, although Game of Death 2 does play that game again, at least it has the decency of going back to the original material of Enter the Dragon and choosing alternate takes from the existing scenes, to make it seem at least somewhat exclusive to the Game of Death 2. Unlike Game of Death 1, which directly cut shots from a duplicate of the negative of whatever completed Lee film they were poaching from. After finding out about Chin Koo's death, Lee causes vengeful carnage throughout Tokyo, and especially when talking to Chin Koo's daughter about her father's disappearance. The fake Bruce Lee fighting in Game of Death 2, and the overall presentation of Bruce Lee as a figure is done far better than it was in the first film, to a point where it almost doesn't offend me. The film almost presents Bruce Lee as a comic book superhero, with a tongue-in-cheek approach, not trying to claim this is literally the real Bruce Lee, but more of a representation of him. It's a far easier pill to swallow than the large dark sunglasses and fake beards fiasco of Game of Death 1. After visiting Chin's funeral, Lee is bumped off by falling off a helicopter trying to pick up Chin's coffin from the ground.
What?
Yes, they decide to kill off Bruce Lee's character and switch him out with Bobby Lowe, Bruce's brother, who was established earlier in the film, where unseen footage of Bruce Lee visits his apartment and discovers it covered in porn mags. After hearing of his brother's death, Bobby stares at publicity photos of his fallen brother and vows revenge. Despite not technically appearing anymore, there's a lot of evidence to suggest the film was originally going to try to feature Bruce Lee and his character throughout, as after the character's death, Kim Tai-chung, playing Lee's brother, still dresses in outfits that match scenes from Lee's completed films, and the vast majority of the final sequence has Kim's face covered in shadow, which suggests they were hiding his face in an attempt to pass him off as the real thing. Further evidenced in an early promotional teaser, originally promising the release date of fall 1980, dubbing over Bruce Lee battle cries over the final fight with Hwang Jang-lee, where there is none in the finished film. It's very common for HK martial arts films of the period to start filming without a finished script, and essentially make it up as they went along, so it wouldn't be surprising if 2/3 of the film was shot with the intention of passing the film off as featuring Bruce Lee throughout, and it was only near to the start of post-production that director Eun Si-young realised that he didn't have enough unused footage of Lee to achieve this. Eun had been promised unseen footage of the 1972 Game of Death by Raymond Chow, in addition to unused footage from Enter the Dragon. Unfortunately, in the former's case, that just turned out to be outtakes from the already existing fights in the 1978 version, and therefore couldn't be incorporated into a new film. Footage was also sparse for Enter the Dragon 2, only found that he could string together about 3 deleted sequences of Lee in the film to pass off the character's appearance in the first half of Game of Death 2. One of these sequences, Lee's conversation with the Abbot, had already appeared in some international versions of the film, and was later reinstated into the American version of Enter the Dragon for its 25th anniversary. One of the other deleted scenes, here in the context of Lee learning of Chinku's death in the newspaper, was merely an extended version of a scene which had already appeared in Enter the Dragon, of Bruce talking to his father in his Shaolin apartment, images of which were heavily used in some advertising campaigns of Game of Death 2, despite the scene mostly appearing in Enter the Dragon originally. These deleted scenes feature no footage of Bruce fighting, just him walking into rooms or sitting down and talking to people. There was almost no fighting left over from any version of Enter the Dragon, and a brief bit where he sidekicks a guard before jumping into battle with the bow staff. It looks as if this moment was intended to be integrated into Game of Death 2, as when Bobby Lowe first enters the underground base, the Opium Den set has been partially rebuilt, with Bobby wearing the same outfit as Bruce during that sequence. It looks as if the same was meant for the unused axe kick footage, with a sequence in Game of Death 2 of Bobby Lowe wearing the same black jumpsuit from that sequence while scoping the grounds at day for night, but this plan was abandoned, and the setups to incorporate new footage were inexplicably still featured in the final edit. Some of the impact of Bruce's simulated presence diminishes once Kim Tai-chung takes over as the lead of the film, who, whilst a good impersonator of Bruce, isn't really an actor, and it shows as he struggles to command the screen next to his larger-than-life co-stars Roy Horan and To Wai. This is only a problem for about 20 minutes though, as the film gives way to some truly crazy shit, including Roy Horan's Kung Fu Master Lewis eating meat and drinking blood, full frontal nudity, a Kung Fu fighting lion, and Roy Horan being hanged and stabbed by traitors within his own martial arts school. These scenes come virtually one on top of the other, and it's insane to see. It's revealed that the Bondian scar-faced henchman, played by To Wai, was actually the mastermind behind the betrayal, and the final battle between him and Bobby Lowe segues into Bobby discovering the underground Tower of Death, and the action choreography by Yuen Woo-ping goes into complete Jeet Kune Do overdrive. Every possible single signature move you could expect from a Bruce Lee-style fight scene is majestically incorporated into this flowing but hysterical masterpiece of fight choreography. Part of you wishes it was the big man himself doing it, but Kim pulls it off with such aplomb that it feels more like a tribute to Bruce rather than an exploitation. After single-handedly taking out 24 guards, he then fights a bodybuilder in a leopard print suit, swings across a floor that literally explodes, and goes on to fight the main bad guy, Huang Zhang Li. Yes, he's revealed to be the bad guy.
No one would make that connection.
But it's all set up for one of the best end reel fight sequences ever, throwing the book with every kick and flip you could think of. It seems to go on forever, but it's consistently entertaining and thrilling. Game of Death 2 is pure lunacy from start to finish, so much so that it couldn't be contained into one main version. There are multiple versions of the film, including the American version released by Bryanston Pictures in late 1981, which edited in the greenhouse fight from the Hong Kong version of Game of Death 1 to the film, footage of Bruce Lee's funeral, as well as a flashback sequence that utilises stock footage of Lee as a child actor in Hong Kong. The film is so desperate for you to recognise him that the title cards are inserted so you don't miss that the child actor in the grainy black and white footage is actually Lee. There's also a Korean version which, probably in an attempt to prop up its local Korean star, Kim Tai-chung, removes almost all footage of Bruce Lee and restructures the film entirely, featuring sequences entirely unique to that version, and that have so far not been released on any HD video format. The film ends up being a Bruce Lee-style film featuring the man who pretended to be him in the first Game of Death, and features vague references and connections to his filmography. It kind of falls into an uncanny valley between a Bruceploitation movie and a film that claims to be a legitimate tribute to Bruce Lee. But for pure concentrated weirdness, I would stick with the Hong Kong theatrical version. It's brilliant and transcends the exploitative sins of its predecessor.